The Musikinsel Rheinau is a little island in the middle of the river Rhine, just between the border of Switzerland and Germany. Actually, for you, on the right side is Switzerland, and all of the island actually is Switzerland. On the right side, the trees already are Germany. It's an old monastery. The entire island actually has been a monastery from the 8th century onwards, with monks living there, cultivating everything from fruit to vegetables to producing books, and actually doing quite a lot of trade between the north of Europe and the south of Europe. For hundreds of years, monks were living there, ora and labora, in beautiful cruciform, in beautiful cloisters, walking around. In the 19th century, they stopped using the monastery, and the monastery was sold to the Swiss state. The Swiss state decided to make a hospital. It actually was the first and the biggest psychiatric hospital in Switzerland until the year 2000. In the year 2000, they stopped using it, and this gigantic, impressive building sat here empty. And people have been looking for a long time to do, what should we do with this building? A few years ago, the decision was taken to transform it into a Musikinsel, so into a music island. And half of the building now is used by orchestras and other musicians for orchestra academies, chamber music masterclasses, and other events. In this building, we have 16 rehearsal rooms of different sizes, from small individual practice rooms to medium-sized rehearsal rooms from 5 to 10 up to 15 people, to two big rooms, the music room and the old library, more than 200 square meters. They're big enough. For the library, it fits a choir, fits a big choir, and the music room fits an entire orchestra. The challenge, of course, was to adapt a historic monastery building to a music building. Each room had to be treated, and not only each room had to be treated, musicians need to be able to work in parallel. So if you rehearse in one room, you shouldn't be disturbed in the other room. So we had to do everything from acoustic isolation to interior room acoustics. Acoustic isolation in the end turned out to be quite easy. Monastery walls often are 0.5 meter thick, sometimes 1 meter thick. And we have a few little individual cabins where you can really make as much noise as you want to, and nobody really hears you. In other instances, the challenge was rooms that were finished, that were beautiful looking, that were architecturally finished with a lot of historic surfaces, but not adapted to musical use. Much to resonance, much to reverberance. And we had to transform them into living spaces, into working spaces, by delicately integrating acoustic absorption so that the over-resonance got dampened down to a nice acoustics that you can work with. Here we're in the new music room of the music island Rheinau. So that actually is the room where we were allowed to do the biggest intervention. In the 1950s, they transformed this room into a theater, which was a bit derelict. So here it's not historic fabric, it is built within the historic fabric. So the windows are original, the width of the side wall is original, but other than that we had pretty much freedom to do what we wanted to do. It is the biggest room of the music island, so it therefore is the orchestra rehearsal room. First thing we tried is to get as much ceiling height as we could. As you see, we have a coffered ceiling. So the ribs actually hide the structure, the historic structure of the ceiling, and in between we go as high as possible. Of course, there is a reminiscence to old cassette ceilings, so it's the coffered ceiling rooms like the Vienna Musikverein or the Amsterdam Concertgebouw, or actually many historic rooms in castles. But the other main thing here is to get as high as possible. The other thing we did, it's a plasterboard ceiling. It is not horizontal, it's slightly tilted to make sure that there is no reflections, no flutter echo back to the source, but a good distribution of reflections in the room. The same happens with the two walls. You can see the two end walls. The one you see here is actually a piece of art from a Swiss artist called Beat Soderer. So it's a whole design element done in this room. What you see is all acoustic cushions. In fact, it's a bit cheated. Half of these cushions are acoustically absorbing and half of the cushions are acoustically reflective. The idea was exactly to get a partial reflection back to the orchestra, but do some absorption as well. You see the same in the side walls. That's another new invention here. It's very lightweight, light transparent curtains, but they are acoustically very efficient. It's a new development actually from Switzerland, so it's very lightweight, but micro-porous absorbing curtains. And here we have the full freedom to put a curtain in front of the window and therefore make the wall absorbing, or to keep the windows open. So it is both to break the lights, but mainly for acoustics, to make the room resonate or to make the room drier and therefore more appropriate for orchestra recording. Here we are in one of the rehearsal rooms, but before renovation. As you can hear, it's an extremely resonant room. That's how we found more or less all rooms before the renovation. And of course the challenge was, what can we do to make rooms with such a bathroom acoustics adapted for orchestra or instrument rehearsal? Okay, so here we are in the same room. It's actually not the same room, but we are in a similar room after renovation. You see that the room looks somewhat different, but it mainly is the same room. It looks visually a bit different, but it acoustically is really enormously different. It's very easy to show. If we compare that to what we're used to, it now is a rehearsal room. It is a room that has a much drier, a much more controlled acoustic where musicians can play in. What have we done? You see here actually all the interventions we've used. There is some fixed wall panels where we are allowed to put wall panels onto the wall. They are screwed into the wall. It's absorption panels, specially kind of designed absorption panels that have mineral wool with some fabric in there, with actually a plastic film in there to make sure that all frequencies get absorbed. So that's the fixed panels. Then we have mobile panels or movable panels that actually can come in and out of the room, so you can even use them to change the acoustics, to adapt the acoustics to what you want. You can turn them around and use them as reflector panels as well. And then the other thing you see is actually the same we do at home. We have curtains. We have curtains that of course were chosen acoustically to work acoustically. So we have curtains that absorb some more sound. We have carpets that were deliberately selected. They're a bit thicker than normal carpets, so actually they absorb large bands of sound. And the last one, which we'll see in the corridors as well, we have the radiator cover. So we've actually used the radiator covers to hide some additional absorption. So here is the whole catalog of absorbing elements we have used. Some of them are fixed but integrated into the architecture of the room. Some of them are movable, and some of them are pretty much as normal furniture of the rooms, equipment that goes together with the use of the room. Here we are in one of the rehearsal rooms. As you can see, a rehearsal room with a beautiful historic ceiling. What was clear during the renovation that we would not touch the historic ceiling. The ceiling actually gives us an acoustic advantage that it is spreading the sound. It's what we call acoustic diffusion. But before the renovation, the room was much too resonant, much too reverberant. What we can see here, it's one of the smaller rehearsal rooms, mainly meant for piano and strings. We do differentiate the acoustics. There are some rooms that are better for strings and better for woodwinds, while other rooms are more highly dampened for percussion or for brass instruments. Even saxophones will be playing here. So we have rooms with a little bit more acoustic and other rooms with less acoustic, so with even more highly dampened acoustic. Here the challenge was to integrate the acoustic absorption into the ceiling, into the room. The ceiling we can't touch, but we have other elements. You see behind the piano there is a fixed absorption panel wall, so that's a new addition, clearly separated from the architecture. We do have here it's the smaller elements, mobile absorption panels that you can place behind the musicians, or you just leave in the room as bass absorption. The other thing we have is the carpet. We deliberately have carpet on wood floors so that there's some absorption between the ceiling and the floor. And we have the curtains. And here once again the trick is more, it's the cladding of the radiators. So in front of the radiators we have a radiator cover, and even that radiator cover is acoustically absorbing, allowing us to transform the acoustics from a too resonant acoustic to acoustics that actually works for rehearsals. Here we are in another of the rehearsal rooms of the Musikinsel Rheinau. This is one tract of the building, which is the main floor. All of the rooms have these vaulted ceilings. So they have ceiling vaults we are used to seeing in cellars. Here it's the main floor, and it's actually the cloisters themselves have the same structure for the building. Vaulted ceilings are acoustically interesting. Very often people think about any curve is dangerous acoustically. This is not quite the case. They can be bad and they can be good, and this is a very clear example of a ceiling that does both. First of all, it's a rehearsal room, so it needed to be treated acoustically. Here once again we have the acoustic panels behind us, the acoustic panels behind the piano. There is another wall of acoustic panels on the other side. In this room, the wood floor no longer existed, so we actually took advantage of putting carpet on the floor, which partially compensates the effect of the vaulted ceiling. The other thing is, the moment I'm outside of the center of the room, the vaulted ceiling is actually not a problem. It's beneficial for me. For me, it's very nice to speak. I have projection. I can hear a little bit of reverb from the other side of the room. It is only when I really move into the center of the room, and even then, is it actually bad? My voice is amplified. It is a little bit colored, but for me it's actually quite fun to speak here. So it's actually adaptable acoustics in a very easy way. I can decide whether I prefer to speak here, or when I'm practicing, I can decide whether I want to practice here or whether I just want to go to the other side of the room and get a different acoustics. As we'll see with some of the other rooms, it's actually an effect that only occurs when the room is empty. The moment I put some chairs for musicians in the middle of the room, that effect disappears, because the chairs or the musicians on the chairs do exactly the same thing as we see in some of the other rooms with a ceiling. With a highly sculpted diffusing ceiling, we are breaking up the sound. Chairs or musicians do the same thing. They break up the sound, they create a more homogeneous sound field. So the moment I have 5 or 6 or 8 musicians in here, this effect of the vaulted ceiling is actually gone and no longer a problem. But as we said, whether it's a problem or not depends on the use and depends on how you use the room. And it depends on the users as well, whether the users are quick enough to react and go to the parts of the room that are best for them, and avoid the parts of the room that may be problematic for them. Here we are in the smaller room, a practice room, an individual element practice room, either piano or a solo player. What you can see here, the smaller the room gets, the more relative absorption we need. So even in the small room we have one big panel, we have absorbing carpet, and we have a curtain on the wall, so that the room does not get too loud and you can practice here for many hours. The challenge here, of course, was to transform the historic rooms into working places for the musicians. Spaces that have an adapted acoustics for working musicians. Working rooms is different from concert halls. So here it was really the focus on working conditions for musicians. That you don't do as an acoustician alone. Here, the architects of the entire project were Bembe Dellinger, a young German firm, that very delicately integrated it. And I think it was a real collaboration between the architects and the acoustician